This is a plastic drop cloth. It's really great because it doesn't stick to anything. It's relatively inexpensive, saving your space from getting paint all over the place. This is a picture of a color wheel. It's really handy for choosing colors. You don't have to mix them first. You can just look at the color wheel and pick from the wheel, then mix them or use it right from the tube. And you can tell which colors are going to pop by just looking at opposite sides of the wheel. And you can turn the wheel. It has a couple layers, so it'll show you what they look like to add gray or to add black and to add white to each color. So you can sort of plan out your color using the color wheel. Very handy. This is just an example of a finished painting. This is called Salmon Streaming One by Wolfgang Livingston. And it is a painting that is square in shape. Looks like abstract fish swimming in a stream. They look like they're in blue water, the red salmon with some grasses maybe in the foreground. This is a basic watercolor set, and these tubes are a good kind as well. They do have a lot of color in the paint, and you will use only a tiny bit of paint and more water when it comes to watercolor paints. Watercolor brushes, you can buy a set of about 10. There's different shapes available in the sets. They're very inexpensive. They're called flat, round, dagger, which is the pointed shape that you see, and a detail brush. These are good shapes to start out with. They have short handles and they have very soft bristles. They may be natural hair or synthetic. They're available in both compositions of the bristles themselves. Again, watch out for shedding brushes. If the brush starts to shed, then you'll have to start using another brush because they just don't doesn't work out really well to have, you know, brush hairs in your painting. Watercolor paper. This is just a picture of 3 different sizes of watercolor paper pads. I've used this type and they're pretty good. It's heavy paper, a textured surface. It's called cold press. With a smooth surface, it's called hot press. And this kind is good and it doesn't cost too much. And it is a pad of sheets of paper. If you use sheets of paper to paint with watercolor, you're going to be using quite a bit of water. So you'll be able to not avoid curling of your paper if you put it onto a board. So you can get a pretty inexpensive wooden art panel, big enough to match the size of your paper that you're working with. Tape your paper down on all 4 sides with artist tape. Then you can do your watercolor painting, and when it's finished and dry, you can just take the tape away and take the painting off the board, and it won't be curly, it'll be flat. Another way to do that is to use a watercolor block, which is like a stack of watercolor paper that's glued on 4 sides. There's a little tiny space where there's no glue, so you can kind of put in a palette knife or a butter knife and just peel off that top, move it around the edges of that one top sheet of paper once your painting is done and dry. They're handy because you don't have to do any stretching or taping to a board. You can just paint on the top layer of paper in that block and peel it off when it's done. A watercolor palette is where you get to mix your colors. I say go for the plastic ones from the art store. They should be white so you can mix the colors correctly. The clear ones don't work so well, or clear options like clear food containers, they don't work so well with watercolor. It doesn't have a whole lot of body to it, so it's easier, it's watery. So it's easier to see the colors that you're using on a white palette. Of course, you could get your hands on a plastic container for food, clean it out, and then paint the back of it white, and that might help too. But these palettes are pretty inexpensive, and I always say they're easy to use, so they're a good thing. And this is just an example of a finished watercolor painting by Wolfgang Livingston, and it is called The Wavy Harbor. And hopefully you can see in the painting that, watercolor is pretty distinctive because the color areas are so, spread out and kind of free and loose because it's watercolor. Drawing tools, I like to keep it simple. Acrylic markers are really good for signatures on acrylic paintings, and maybe some drawing that you do ahead of your painting if you're doing a watercolor. Sharpie markers, great for that too. If you want to do some drawing and then do a watercolor, you can see that in the watercolor painting that we just looked at. See if I can go back to it. You can see in this painting, especially on the left, this is a painting of boats in a harbor. It's quite abstract, but it's mostly purple and it's got some green. It looks like a little hill and waves and some boat shapes in the front. And you can see some black lines. Those are done with a Sharpie. And you can do those before, you apply the paint. All right. So it's a pretty simple plan for making sharper lines in a painting. For tactile choices, you can think about polymer clay. This is for if you want to make something that's three-dimensional or something that you feel with your hands, and that's part of your art process. Polymer clay is like plastic clay. You can actually bake it in a toaster oven. I would say to use a toaster oven that's a separate one from the one you bake your food in if you can. But it's pretty handy because you can mix colors with it. You can make all kinds of shapes with it. It does come in pretty small blocks, so I'm not talking about giant sculptures here, but you can make little 3D shapes with it. And there's a whole world to explore just with that, but it's easy to find and relatively inexpensive. Also, artists like to use fabric or yarn or other small items for a heavy texture for a tactile element to their work. You may already have some craft supplies. You can make an assemblage, which is just assembling pieces onto a surface. You can build a heavy texture like that. Again, add enough glue or medium and glue them down very well. Add paint and or more to the texture. Or instead of putting them on a flat surface, you could think about winding or weaving them together to make an object. There's just a couple of ideas for the tactile part, staying more within the realm of painting. So for collage, do you like pictures of favorite things? You can cut them out and put them on a painting, and this is called collage. You can paint over them in thin layers of paint or paint around the pieces. And the picture is our artist Thor with several collage pieces of things that he's cut out of interest to him, musical instruments. In this particular picture, he's getting ready to attach them to a canvas using medium. And this is an example of a finished collage painting. It is called Rock and Roll Guitar by Thor Livingston, and you can see that it has a guitar and it has a flag and a sun. It has green and some gold and yellow around in red around a guitar, which is in the very center. Underneath the guitar, looks like there's a car grill and a few different words that are upside down. Looks like newspaper printing, and his signature at the lower right. And that's our quick presentation about basic art materials. Hopefully we've been able to give you an idea about how to approach art and some possibilities for basic art materials that would work for you. Hello, welcome to video 3 of the Make Art Your Way series. And this one is about art materials, just the basics. We're going to go through a list of art materials and talk about the features of each one. Just know that you don't have to buy everything that we're going to talk about here today, especially if you're just beginning. It might seem, kind of daunting to see this big list of art supplies, but you could just start with one thing, or you could start with what you have. We just want to make sure that you know about what's out there and what's doable and reachable. And we'll get started in just a second here. I'm going to share my screen and get our presentation ready.